Then the questioning will start with Commissioner Gorelick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I would note, given the panel that we've just had, that it's my observation that the government of the United States left the job of defending the American people from the scenario that played out on September 11th to the FAA, which is an unfair burden to have placed on an agency whose job description is almost entirely not the situation it faced. And so I want to thank the men and women of the FAA for the hard work that they did in excruciating circumstances. Certainly there were flaws, and we will explore them, but I am quite uncomfortable if we leave the impression that all of this would have been fine if you all had just done your job, because I personally don't believe that. I think there is plenty of fault to go around if that's what we're doing, and I hope that that's not what we're doing. One of the ways that the government might have been better positioned as a whole, and the FAA better positioned in particular, would have been if you had gotten some sense at a very high level of the threat. And I want to review that with Mr. Belger. During the summer of 2001, you told us that you had no knowledge of the heightened threat. I think that was a quote. You said that the threat assessments that the FAA got were not reflective of an unusual or inordinate anxiety level. Am I correct in both of those, Mr. Belger?
That's correct.
And you got no notice of anything of the sort that was in the August 6th presidential daily brief. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, General Canavan has told us that he was called to a meeting at the White House in the beginning of July, a meeting with the Counterterrorism Security Group, at which threat information was shared, and the FAA undertook then to put out, to make some alerts. And we've gone back and looked at those alerts. And are you aware that the FAA sent out nothing until July 24th? Have you gone back and looked at what the FAA actually did?
I have looked at all of the information circulars that were put out actually that summer and the previous summer.
Well, after General Canavan is called to the White House, just to cut through it, there were no additional security directives of any relevance. And the security directives, am I correct, are the things that would have allowed you to raise the level of security alert and change the actual operational and security baseline. Is that correct?
That's correct. There were two types of information that was generally given to the industry. One was called a circular, which was just information. And secondly, as you are correct, a directive which would have directed the airlines and the airports to do something different.
And no such direction ever took place.
That's correct.
And then there were information circulars that went out at various times, but they did not really put anyone on alert to anything remotely like the scenario that we had, and even then were full of caveats saying things like we don't have credible information regarding any plans attacking U.S. Civilian aviation. Is that right?
That is correct.
So as a practical matter, nothing that emanated from the FAA would have alerted people at any position of responsibility, whether it's at an airline check-in counter or a screener or an airline in general, to do something that meaningfully might have stopped this plot. Is that right?
Well, the FAA, yes, that is correct. If I could just add to that very briefly. You're right. The FAA did not put out any directives that summer requiring the airlines or the airports to do anything other than what was at that time the ordinary. But I must add to that answer that the airlines and the airports were already at a very heightened level in terms of the security procedures that were in place.
But there were additional levels in your toolbox
that
were not exercised.
That
is
is correct. That's correct.
Now I'm going to ask you a hypothetical question, and you can answer it any way you wish. But if you, Monte Belger, or your boss, Jane Garvey, or her boss, Secretary Mineta, had been called to the White House and alerted to what we now know were the kinds of frightening intelligence coming out in the so-called summer of threat, do you think you might have taken a different set of steps Might you have changed the actual security baseline that the airlines were holding themselves to at that point in time?
Well, in the context of a hypothetical question, I'll answer it. And I don't know exactly what General Canavan was told or heard at that meeting, but, I mean, the FAA's history is pretty clear that we were never reluctant to put out security directives if there was information upon which we could base those directives. So I think my answer to your question is, if I had known, if Administrator Garvey had known, if the folks in the Secretary's office had known of any potential threat in which we could have put some procedures in place to alleviate, we would have done that.
Now, we know that we in the federal government did not have specific so-called actionable intelligence in that so-and-so is going to hijack a plane on such and such a day, or even that what we were hearing about was something that was related to a domestic hijacking. But the government as a whole, and certainly our intelligence community, was, to use the phrase, running around with their hair on fire. People were very anxious, and I guess what I'm asking is, given that level of anxiety, given the chatter, given what I think Dr. Rice described the government as being at battle stations, my question to you is, were you at battle stations? And if, given the heightened threat, but the lack of specificity, would you have done something different if you personally had been alerted, or your boss or your boss's boss had been alerted to this heightened level of threat?
Well, two parts of that question, which I'll answer separately. First of all, as I said to the staff during that summer period, I saw no intelligence, nor did our security folks tell me anything that would lead us to direct the airlines or the airports to do anything other than what they were doing. So if we use that phrase, heightened level of security, I don't think the FAA saw the need to do that. Then secondly, though, as I said earlier, if we had any information that there was a potential threat that we could react to, we would have.
Well, that's almost tautological. I mean, if you knew of a threat, you would have reacted to it. You're saying that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're saying that had you personally known of the general heightened level of threat, you would or would not have taken additional steps to that which were taken?
Well, again, I think that's a little bit hypothetical, so I'm not sure just what that heightened level of threat information is that people were talking about. What I will say very clearly is, if information had been given to me or the administrator, I have no doubt about that, that was directly related to aviation security, and there was something we could have done to put in new procedures, different procedures to react to that, we would have, without hesitation.
Let me just follow that up. I mean, we know that half of the hijackers were because they came up in screening on caps, and yet the only thing that was done related to their checked bags. If we were, I might imagine that in a very heightened state of alert, you would say, well, the consequence of being stopped is that you actually are screened. Your handbag is screened, for example. Now, would you have, if you had thought, I mean, you have said to us, you didn't know anything about this. If you or your boss or your boss's boss had known about the heightened level of threat, would you have considered directing the airlines to have a different set of procedures, a heightened level of procedures?
We would have considered it, and in fact, we did implement that after 9/11.
Thank you. My colleague, Senator Gordon, will have some additional questions. We've kind of divided up the territory here on the day of 9/11, but I'm particularly interested in one thing. At 9/16, the tapes reveal that a manager from the Boston Center asked the command center to issue on the day of 9/11, issue a nationwide cockpit security alert, which Boston had done, which meant, as I understand it, you told everybody, lock your cockpit doors or beware of someone trying to enter the cockpit. But such an alert was not issued, and a quarter of an hour later, the cockpit in United 93 was breached. Can you explain that decision? Can any of you explain that decision?
Well, Mr. White was the senior person at the command center. He might be the best able to do that.
I wasn't aware of that request. I wasn't.
You hit your mic.
I wasn't aware of that request. This is the first I've heard of it today. I wasn't in a position that day to have heard that request. Have always been under the assumption that we did issue a verbal warning to the air carriers about cockpit security. I don't know if we even made a decision, or if there was ever a determination made why we shouldn't send a advisory out. I'm not aware of that.
All right, well, we will ask the, does anyone else in this panel have any relevant information on that? We'll follow up privately then, thank you on that. The protocol, as I understand it, for hijackings was to, on the day of 9/11, was to allow the hijacking to go forward, essentially, not to resist, and to let it go forward and deal with the consequences once the plane landed, on the assumption that that's what the hijackers were going to do. And it struck me that, well, it struck a lot of people that protocol did not reflect the kind of intelligence we had about what Al-Qaeda and other terrorists might be planning. Was there any effort made on the part of the leadership of the FAA to look at that protocol and test it against the kind of intelligence that you were getting about the threats to our aviation system?
The short answer is no. You are right that prior to 9/11, the protocol was get the airplane on the ground and start a negotiation process with the hijacker. Make sure the airplane's on the ground safely and start a negotiation process. That worked throughout the years prior to 9/11. I'm not aware of any particular scenarios or exercise that we went through to test that protocol against the type of intelligence that you talked about, which quite frankly, as I said before, wasn't getting to the FAA.
So one can note that protocol was changed by the passengers and the crew of United 93. They threw that protocol out the window in real time.
Yes.
Our staff statement reflects a very long 39-minute gap in between when the FAA became aware of United 93 as a hijacking and when the military was notified at 10:07, which was, of course, after the impact into the Pentagon. And I want to give you all the opportunity to explain why that occurred.
Well,
I'm sorry, not impact into the Pentagon, impact into the ground in Pennsylvania.
Right. The most frustrating after-the-fact scenario for me to understand and to explain is the communication link on that morning between the FAA Operations Center and the NMCC. That's still frustrating for me to understand how that, I know how it's supposed to work, but I have to tell you, it's still a little frustrating for me to understand how it actually did work on that day. It is clear, I think, in the record that at 9:20, the FAA Operations Center did call the National Military Command Center and add them into the hijacking net. The hijacking net is an open communication net run by the FAA hijack coordinator, who is a senior person from the FAA security organization, for the purpose of getting the affected federal agencies together to hear information at the same time. That's the purpose of the hijack net. There are other nets off of that, which some are classified and some are real tactical command type of discussions, but the fundamental primary source of information between the FAA, DOD, FBI, Secret Service, and whichever other agencies, the airlines would probably be on that net, is the FAA hijack net. That was activated with the NMCC at 9:20. It was my assumption that morning, as it had been for my 30 years of experience with the FAA, that the NMCC was on that net and hearing everything real time.
Did you do anything to ensure that your assumption, a costly one, was correct?
No. I was real busy that morning, and I did not ask specifically, is the NMCC on? I can tell you, I lived through dozens of hijackings in my 30-year FAA career as a very low entry-level inspector up through to the headquarters, and they were always there. They were always on the net, and we're always listening in with everybody else.
At some point, however, in the course of that call, you became aware that the military was not involved in any meaningful way. Is that correct? We heard some rather colorful language came from your mouth at that point.
I don't doubt that. Yeah, I mean, later in the morning, as I had time to not just react to everything and think, I believe I did ask, are they on? And make sure.
And when you found out that they weren't,
No, I wasn't very happy.
I guess I'll leave this to my colleague, Senator Gordon.
Senator